In September 1940, the United States Army Air Corps made a bold request. They wanted a fighter jet so advanced, it had to look like it came from the future. Engineers got to work. They sketched, they dreamed, and they built a plane unlike anything the world had ever seen. It was called the XP-67 Moonbat. But in 1944, just 4 years later, that dream caught fire, right on the runway. And it all ended before it even started. Just imagine, spending years designing a machine to rule the sky, only to watch it burn before firing a single shot. So what went wrong? Why is the Moonbat still remembered today as one of the wildest aircraft ever made? And what hidden flaw doomed it from the very start? Picture a jet with melted wings, blended engines, and a smooth body that looked like science fiction. If you've flown it in War Thunder, you know, this wasn't just a plane, it was a legend. And now, in the next few minutes, you'll see how the Moonbat rose, burned, and vanished. This is the untold story of the XP-67, the fighter that promised the future but never escaped the past. In 1940, with war spreading across the world, the U.S. Army Air Corps made an unusual call. They launched a contest, the R-40C program. But this wasn't for just any fighter. They wanted something radical, something no one had ever tried before. They were searching for the next generation of aircraft. Most companies backed away. The risks were too high. The rules were too strange. But one company stepped forward, a small name in the shadows, McDonnell Aircraft. At the time, McDonnell had never built a single fighter plane. No fame, no experience, no past victories. But they had an idea, a design they called Model 2A. It didn't look like anything in the sky, and it broke all the old rules. While giants like Lockheed and Curtiss played it safe, McDonnell went all in. Every penny, every hour, every engineer. They bet it all on one wild dream. And then, something shocking happened. In September 1941, the Army said yes. They awarded McDonnell a real contract, a chance to build the fighter they imagined. They called it the XP-67. The press later nicknamed it the Moonbat. From a team with no track record came one of the most daring machines ever approved. But why? What made this fighter so different? Why did it stand out in a field filled with legends? As the XP-67 moved from paper to metal, the world saw something truly new. This wasn't just a plane. It looked like it came from tomorrow. Engineers at McDonnell shaped a body no one had ever tried before. They didn't build separate wings and a fuselage. They blended it all into one smooth, flowing form. The result looked like a giant bat. Dark, sleek, and silent. People called it the Moonbat for a reason. The wings didn't stick out. They melted into the body. No sharp lines, no hard edges. Just one seamless shape, built to slide through the air. Even the engines were buried deep inside the curves. This cut down on drag, the air resistance that slows planes down. It was beautiful. It was bold. It was like science fiction flying in the real world. But that beauty came with a price. The buried engines caused problems. Cooling became a nightmare. The heat built up too fast. The engines started to fail again and again. What looked smooth on the outside was full of trouble inside. The dream shape was hard to build, harder to fix, and nearly impossible to control. Still, the team pushed forward. Because they believed in the vision, they believed this shape could change the future of flight. But belief wasn't enough. The question now became something simple and scary. Could this futuristic design actually work in the sky? Or would it crash under the weight of its own genius? After years of drawings, welding, and sleepless nights, the day finally came. January 6, 1944. The XP-67 was ready to fly. This was supposed to be the moment where dreams turned into history. The runway cleared, engines roared. The Moonbat lifted into the air for the very first time. But then, just 6 minutes later, it started to overheat. The engines sputtered. The test pilot was forced to land. Fast. Just like that. The dream almost died. Years of hard work, risk, and belief, nearly gone in minutes. It was like saving for your dream car, polishing it, starting it, and then watching the engine die at the first turn. The feeling inside the McDonnell team? Heartbreak. But they didn't quit. They rolled the fighter back into the hangar. They started repairs. And those repairs didn't take days. They dragged on for months. Every fix brought new problems. Every test brought new questions. Money started to run low. Time was slipping away. The Army was growing impatient. The world was still at war, and no one could wait forever. People started to whisper, maybe this plane was just too strange to ever fly. But McDonnell didn't stop. They believed in the Moonbat, in its shape, in its promise, in the idea that something bold was still worth saving. Now the pressure was building. Could they fix it? Could they prove the skeptics wrong? Could the XP-67 still become the fighter it was meant to be? By spring 1944, the XP-67 was back in the sky. The engines had been repaired. The team was feeling hopeful again. But then, the test results came in, and they hit like a punch to the gut. The top speed was just 405 miles per hour. Not terrible, but not enough. The Army had asked for at least 472 miles per hour. That number wasn't a wish, it was the requirement. Even worse, the P-51 Mustang, already flying in combat, could go faster than the XP-67. A plane from the past was outrunning a plane from the future. That was the problem. The XP-67 looked like a spaceship, but it couldn't keep up with what was already in the air. It was like designing a sleek new sports car, only to find out it couldn't beat a pickup truck. And yet, here came the twist. The aerodynamics were actually working perfectly. The shape was doing its job. The issue wasn't the body, it was the engines. They simply weren't powerful enough. The dream was held back by two underpowered hearts. So why not fix it? Why not just install stronger engines and save the project? That was the obvious question. The team knew it. The Army knew it. Everyone could see the potential. But behind the scenes, new challenges were rising. Money was tight, time was short, and World War II wasn't waiting for anyone. So now came the hardest choice of all. Could they keep pushing forward? Or was it already too late to save the Moonbat? Behind every smooth curve of the XP-67 was a problem no one could hide: the engines. From the start, the XP-67 was built around the Continental 1430 engines. On paper, they sounded perfect: high power, high speed, small size. But in real life, they became the Moonbat's curse. They overheated again and again. They were hard to cool, hard to maintain, and worse, they broke down during tests. Every time the plane left the hangar, something failed: a hose, a seal, a line. It was like building a supercar and stuffing it with a broken engine. The outside screamed future, but inside, it was falling apart. The engineers worked day and night. They patched leaks. They tested fuel lines. They made changes. But each fix brought a new failure. The XP-67 wasn't getting stronger. It was just surviving. And as 1944 pushed on, time was running out. The war in Europe was reaching its peak, and the Army needed planes that could fly now, not later. Other fighters were already in the sky, proven, fast, reliable. The Moonbat, still grounded by two engines that refused to play along. People started calling it a hangar queen, a plane that looked great but never left the floor. And deep down, the team knew. They were fighting a battle they couldn't win, because no matter how beautiful the body, a fighter jet is only as strong as the engines that carry it. So the final question now was simple. If the engines were doomed from the start, what final disaster would seal the Moonbat's fate? For good. It was supposed to be just another test flight. Nothing risky, nothing new, just a simple trip into the sky and back. But on September 6, 1944, something went very wrong. As the XP-67 climbed through the clouds, the left engine suddenly burst into flames. Inside the cockpit, test pilot E. Elliott smelled smoke. He felt the heat. The fire was just feet behind him. No time to panic, no time to think, just training and instinct. He turned the fighter toward the runway. The smoke filled the cockpit. He was flying half-blind, gripping the controls through the flames. But somehow, he made it. The XP-67 hit the ground, hard but safe. Elliot jumped out just in time. Seconds later, the flames took over. The plane burned. The dream burned with it. The first prototype, the only one that had ever flown, was gone. Years of work, hundreds of parts, tens of thousands of hours, all turned to smoke on the runway. The McDonnell team watched their creation melt into ash. It was the emotional peak of the whole project, and its lowest moment. Because it wasn't just a plane, it was a symbol of what they could be. And now it was ashes. But there was still a second prototype, still sitting in the hangar, still untouched, still full of hope. So could that second XP-67 rise from the flames and finally prove the doubters wrong? Could one last chance save the entire program? Or was the fire not just an accident, but a final ending? Just 7 days after the fire, the final order came down. On September 13, 1944, the U.S. Army Air Forces made it official. The XP-67 project was canceled. No more flights, no more tests, no second chances. All work stopped immediately. At that moment, only 43 hours of flight testing had ever been logged. And the second prototype? Only 15% complete. It was never finished, never flown, never even touched the sky. It was scrapped, piece by piece. For the engineers at McDonnell, it felt like losing a family member. The XP-67 wasn't just metal and math. It was their dream, a chance to prove they belonged in the world of giants. And in just one order, it was gone. No ceremony, no warning, just a message. Stop everything. The dream was over. But inside the hangars, inside the silence, a question still burned. Because even with the fire, even with the speed issues, even with the engine trouble, the Moonbat was different. It was bold. It was ahead of its time. So the real mystery still remained. Why did the XP-67 truly fail? Was it the design, the engines, the timing? Or was there a secret reason, one the public never really saw? So why did the XP-67 really fail? It wasn't because the design was broken. It wasn't because the dream was wrong. In truth, the Moonbat was simply too far ahead of its time. The blended wing shape, the smooth curves, the buried engines, all of it worked in theory. The aerodynamics were sound. The science was there. But the technology wasn't. Not in the 1940s. The engines of that era just couldn't handle what the XP-67 needed. They were too weak, too unreliable, too fragile. This wasn't a design flaw. It was a time flaw. The XP-67 was trying to fly in the future, but it was stuck in the past. It became a plane caught between two worlds. Engineers saw the vision. They saw what this could become. But the world around them just wasn't ready. The parts weren't ready. The war couldn't wait. And so the Moonbat died. Not from failure, but from misalignment with history. It's a strange kind of tragedy. Not a machine that failed because it was bad, but a machine that failed because it was brilliant too soon. And that's what makes it so unforgettable. Even today, the XP-67 still feels like it belongs in a sci-fi movie, not in a 1940s hangar. It was a ghost from the future, flying in the wrong decade. So maybe the real question isn't why it failed. But what does the Moonbat truly teach us? About dreams, about timing, and about the real future of aviation? The XP-67 didn't lose because it was broken. It lost because it came too early. The world looked at it as a failure. But now, we know the truth. It wasn't a failure. It was a preview. A first glimpse at what would later become stealth fighters and blended-wing aircraft. Designs that would take decades to perfect. What killed the Moonbat wasn't the shape. It wasn't the vision. It was the engines, built for yesterday, not for the future. It was like plugging a rocket into a wagon. The dream was ready. But the world was not. And that's the real lesson. Even the most brilliant ideas can collapse if the timing is wrong. The XP-67 flew in a time that didn't yet understand it. From its birth in 1940 to its last flight in 1944, it never made it to war, never dropped a bomb, never won a dogfight. But still, it inspired. It whispered to future engineers, "Go further." And in games like War Thunder, it still flies. It still lives as the wildest prototype in the sky. And maybe that's what matters most, because now we see the XP-67 didn't fail. It simply arrived too soon. So ask yourself this: was the Moonbat a mistake, or a vision the world just wasn't ready to follow? The XP-67. Moonbat never flew in combat. It never dropped a bomb. It never saw the skies of Europe or the Pacific, but it still fought. Not on a battlefield, but in the hangars, on the drawings, and inside the hearts of engineers who believed in the future. It was a fighter that dared to be different, and though it was lost to fire, its legacy didn't burn. It lived on. In the stealth bombers we see today, in the blended wing designs flying across the globe, in every bold idea that asks, what if? The Moonbat was the beginning, not the end, and its story still teaches us what it means to dream big, even when the world isn't ready. If you want more stories like this, of secret prototypes, bold dreams, and lost legends of aviation, subscribe now. There's so much more waiting to be told. And now tell us in the comments, if the XP-67 had been built with modern engines, would it have changed the course of history?